Ever since I finished Wind Waker, I'd always wondered what a true sequel to the game would be like. When I was younger, I'd brainstorm my own concepts for it and write potential scenarios for what would happen in the story. I was so obsessed with Wind Waker that I'd even have dreams about it. The game shaped a lot of my views on what a video game could be, and those of you that have watched my nearly 2-hour video on the game know how I feel about it. If you recall, I also admitted to myself that Wind Waker was not without its glaring issues, and those issues became more apparent with each and every playthrough. The Great Sea, while incredible in its own right, was still far from reaching its fullest potential. The game's desire to be accessible to a new, younger generation of Zelda fans had both positive and negative effects, while the rushed development schedule led to a lot of questionable pacing in the game's third act. Wind Waker's core gameplay loop was ripe for expansion, and a direct follow-up would have been, well, legendary. Unfortunately, plans for a Wind Waker 2 were scrapped early on, due to the lukewarm sales figures for the first Wind Waker. Nintendo attributed this to skepticism over the game's cartoonish art style, developed Twilight Princess, and moved beyond the Wind Waker. Elements of the game would survive throughout the Zelda series, and the game's reputation would improve over time, but that true sequel never came to pass. At least, not on the GameCube. The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass was a gameplay and narrative sequel to the Wind Waker, featuring the same incarnation of Link and similar game mechanics. Despite borrowing the framework from Wind Waker, it has a strong sense of individuality, much like Majora's Mask did following Ocarina of Time. It takes full advantage of the DS stylus for virtually every mechanic it introduces, while also attempting to trim the fat of the Wind Waker's Great Sea and build upon its strengths. This combination of elements should make for what I've always wanted in a successor to Wind Waker. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Phantom Hourglass and its sequel, Spirit Tracks, are not exactly beloved entries in the Zelda series. They have their fans, but they are two of the lowest rated entries in the main series, excluding spin-offs and multiplayer games. Video retrospectives on the game mention their divisiveness in some form, and I myself gave up on both of them before beating them when they came out. But recently I began thinking to myself, wait, isn't this exactly what happened with Wind Waker? I mean, sure, Wind Waker was incredibly well received critically when it was released, but reception to its art style, lower difficulty, heavy focus on sailing, and segments at Overworld proved controversial for many years. It took time for its impact to set in. If I had been turning a blind eye to a pair of great attempts at continuing Wind Waker's legacy, I'd never forgive myself. In my video on Skyward Sword, I described my internal conflict over the game, and the admiration I eventually developed for it. I had been clinging to Wind Waker as this gold standard for what the Zelda series should be, instead of accepting the fact that the series was going to move forward and experiment. In doing this, I was not unlike Ganondorf and the King in their final moments. Eventually, I came around on Skyward Sword, and I am now willing to fully embrace everything that Zelda can be. In this video, I want to delve into a few things. I want to see how these games hold up as adaptations of Wind Waker's core concepts. I want to discuss how they take full advantage of the platform they were developed for. But most of all, I want to determine where the identity of each game truly lies, because I don't think they just strive to be successors to Wind Waker. Like every game in the Zelda series, they aim to offer something completely unique, and to some extent, they succeed. I'm Liam Triforce, and this is a video about The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker's dual successors on the Nintendo DS, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. One of the first things I think you'll notice is how well the cel-shaded graphics of Wind Waker have translated to the Nintendo DS. Obviously, the hardware has to use completely different techniques to sell its art direction. They couldn't use the complex directional lighting and shaders they used on the GameCube. Bright or moody lighting setups in these games all depend on the art design. Shadows are baked into the environments, with the only real-time shadows being simplistic ones for characters and objects. When fighting a boss in the ocean, the skybox and the water and island textures seamlessly change color. There are subtle lighting differences in certain areas, such as the Temple of Fire, wherein you can see the glow of the lava on Link's model. But for the most part, models and textures have to carry the weight. In that regard, these visuals are phenomenal for DS games. Sure, they haven't held up as well as the Wind Waker's visuals, but they have their own charm as an example of limitations breeding creativity. And despite the simplicity of the character models, they are still delightfully expressive and beautifully animated. As you can probably tell, Wind Waker's sense of humor has also been preserved. I will say that Spirit Tracks' art design in each area feels more refined and identifiable than Phantom Hourglass. There's a different atmosphere in each quadrant of the map in that game, whereas in Phantom Hourglass, the ocean looks the same throughout. Both games translate the look and feel of Wind Waker gracefully, but I feel Spirit Tracks has the stronger visual identity overall. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are controlled almost exclusively with the touchscreen. There are button shortcuts for opening the map and item selection, and you can quickly ready the item you have equipped by holding down L or R, which makes the action feel even more fluid. But aside from that, every action relies on the stylus. You control Link by pointing in the direction you wish to move him, and to attack enemies you can either tap them, swipe in the direction you want to swing your sword, or perform a spin attack by drawing a wide circle on the screen. This might seem awkward at first, but once you get used to it, it feels surprisingly natural. I would recommend you play on either the Wii U Virtual Console, an emulator with a drawing tablet, or a good-sized DS system that fits your hands. Personally, I use a DSi XL because I have relatively big hands and it has my favorite displays of the bunch. In order to record footage for this video, I had to use an original 3DS. If you have big hands like me and you're playing on a smaller console, your dominant hand will sometimes cover up part of the screen and you'll get blindsided. Despite the time it might take to adjust, I find that this is by far the most accessible control scheme a Zelda game has ever had. Being able to simply tap enemies to attack them and controlling Link by essentially dragging him where you want him to go would foreshadow the intuitiveness of casual smartphone games. The DS's touchscreen interface was universally understandable and incredibly forward-thinking for its time, and much like the Wii, introduced millions of people to video games. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks perfectly complemented this interface through the simplicity of these controls. Drawing a circle to perform a spin attack is quite fun, but it is only the beginning. Nearly all of the items use the touchscreen and reinvent the potential for puzzle design and combat, and the game allows you to write and draw all over its maps. In previous Zelda videos, I've mentioned that certain games in the series encourage sharing information and taking notes. The original Legend of Zelda had so many little secrets to discover that it was incredibly difficult for you to solve the game on your own without some form of help. Whether you'd write stuff down or discuss your findings with friends, the game was an adventure that took a level of ingenuity to solve that hadn't been seen, or done as well, by any other game at the time. Wind Waker evoked a similar feeling thanks to its vast ocean with a multitude of islands to discover, as well as the plethora of clues you could get from the fishmen. I shared personal anecdotes about my friend drawing a crude map and helping me find Cyclos so that I could retrieve the fire and ice arrows, as well as the journey that takes place as you attempt to hunt down and enter the ghost ship. The next logical step in this journey would be to make note-taking not just encouraged, but mandatory. Puzzles that require you to write things down in order to view your environment differently. And that's exactly what they did in these games. Many puzzles in these games allow you to write freely on the map and take notes. And these puzzles are easily some of the most memorable elements of both Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Let's start with Phantom Hourglass's tutorial island, Murkay, as an example of how players are conditioned to this mechanic. In order to retrieve Oshus' sword, you need to count the number of palm trees on the island. To make this easier on yourself, you can leave marks on the map rather than making mental notes in case you find yourself counting the same tree twice. In another cave, you're introduced to the concept of tablets and other things giving you the order of operations for a certain series of interactable objects, like levers or switches. I feel the notion of being able to do this is exciting enough to drive players to take notes of everything they see, and this is essential. The concept of counting trees evolves into the Isle of Ember puzzle, wherein you need to mark the location of the island's 3 torches in order to meet Astrid and proceed into the Temple of Fire. There's a part in the dungeon where you'll need to copy the route from a nearby chart in order to safely navigate around trapdoors, which is further built upon in the Temple of Courage. You can find another chart behind a bombable wall that asks you to draw a path on your map. Soon you'll realize it's a method of navigating an invisible path one room over. This culminates in you drawing a path for a moving block and shooting targets in the order you memorized or wrote down from a previous room. Throughout these games, whether you're on an island, at a station, in a dungeon, out at sea, or aboard your train, you will constantly be referring to your map, as well as adding additional notes and drawings to it as you piece together the world. This constant referral to your map actually proves to be useful in the Temple of Fire's boss. You won't be able to deal damage to the boss unless you throw the boomerang at the enemies in a specific order, with the only clue to this being on your map, as the sprites have not so subtle differences discerning the order you need to hit them in. Truly, the ingeniousness of this concept never seems to falter. Halfway into a playthrough of Phantom Hourglass, the game seemingly goes hands-off and allows the player to be as detailed in their notes as they need to be without explicitly telling them to do so. On Goron Island, you'll have to talk with all of the island's Gorons before you can take the chief's quiz. From here, he'll ask you specific questions about the island's population, like, how many Gorons live on this island? How many Gorons are outside? Of those Gorons, how many are adults? The game doesn't ask you to be this detailed in your notes, but it does encourage it. I think the mandatory puzzle that made me put the most effort into my notes, that is, outside of side quests and a certain temple we'll be discussing later, was on the Isle of Frost. At the north end of the island lies the Anuki Estates, wherein you'll need to talk to all 6 residents in order to figure out which one is a Yuk posing as an Anuki. The chief says that all Yuk are liars, and although Aru says Kumu is lying, Kumu also says Aru could be lying. This eventually spirals into a giant riddle that left me feeling like Charlie in Always Sunny. Thankfully, you can pay for another hint from a nearby Anuki. The guy who says that others are honest won't lie to you. This helps you narrow things down. There are plenty of fantastic puzzles in Phantom Hourglass, and it is easily the game's strongest suit. One of the most infamous puzzles in the game arrives after you discover the location of the Temple of Courage. You are told to press the sacred crest against the sea chart to transfer it. The wording isn't great, but eventually I realized that I had to close my DS in order to transfer the crest. Such a cool solution. There's an Uncharted Island you can discover that has a cool riddle. To begin, you'll notice that Uncharted Islands don't have maps when you first arrive on them. You need to hit a nearby gossip stone to gain knowledge of the island's secret. You need to hit the other gossip stones in a specific order, and it gives you this riddle. It steers with rudder, then makes spray, and third it paddles, then sees away. As you wander around trying to make sense of this information, you'll spot different formations that should give you the inkling that the island is shaped like a whale. And from there, it's all about figuring out where each part of the whale lies so that you can solve the puzzle and retrieve the Cyclone Slate, which enables you to learn symbols and warp to different frogs around the ocean. My favorite example of note-taking being embedded into an area's design is on display as you attempt to enter Muto's temple. It begins on an island with clues scattered everywhere. It isn't until you come across this tablet that you realize the island is shaped like a king's head, complete with a crown. From here you discover that a sacred tree grows from the king's chin, as well as the directions West 13 and North 7. Once you figure out where the tree is supposed to be, that's all the information you get. All that's left is to figure out what West 13 and North 7 means, and for the sake of the video, it means 13 paces west and 7 paces north. Later, you'll also be finding the directions to navigating this game's version of the Lost Woods, as well as piecing together the formation that the tablets in a nearby labyrinth create. Oh, and by the way, in situations where you need to make note of specific things across an island, you're not just painstakingly wandering around and counting things. You can discover puzzles, side quests, and treasure along the way, so it isn't all note-taking for the sake of the main quest. Spirit Tracks still has note-taking of this caliber, but it can be both explicit and subtle, which I think some people will prefer. Of course, there are still the mandatory puzzles like finding a path around the sightlines of these statues, creating a pattern from the statue's gazes, taking note of the mirrored trapdoors in this game's Fire Temple, not to be confused with the Temple of Fire, copying over paths and hazards across the train tracks that I'd find, tracing the path of this drone on floor 16 of the Tower of Spirits and copying its movement on the left side of the room. Spirit Tracks also has its own version of the Anuki puzzle. Once again, there are 6 Anuki, and you need to pair them up based on their likes and dislikes. The village chief will pair up with anyone, but this guy doesn't like big antlers, this guy doesn't like facial hair, and it honestly boils down to a process of elimination. It's simpler, but still very effective. However, outside of that, the game doesn't really enforce it, instead opting to balance multiple gameplay elements equally. Oftentimes, my note-taking proved most useful when I'm trying to solve and memorize the Overworld. I'd keep track of the warp gates by drawing little representations of them on the map, I'd make note of heart containers, potential side quests, treasure chests, and suspicious parts of the map that I wanted to explore later. The game never tells you to do this, but it subconsciously embeds the effectiveness of doing this thanks to the puzzles along the main quest. My absolute favorite puzzle involving note-taking in either of these games appears in the Sand Realm in Spirit Tracks. You receive 4 clues at this mysterious station. The lake forms the sea, the paths form the rails. Find me by blasting the area where the gazes of the big statues meet. Do not dwell on what's inside. Instead, turn your gaze outward. There are no statues here. This is all the information you're given, and at some point when exploring the neighboring ocean realm for clues, you'll realize that the layout of the Sand Realm and that little area are one and the same, and the clues are telling you to look outside to find the statues. From there, you can draw lines to see where their gazes intersect, and translate that to the area in order to blast open the entrance. I love this puzzle, and it perfectly exemplifies the kind of puzzles that are enabled by the ability to draw on the map. There's still a lot to say about puzzle solving in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. It is consistently spectacular. Most Zelda games make memorization feel rewarding, whereas these games can employ as little memorization as your own note-taking skills can allow. While this would normally go against the spirit of Zelda, designing the game around taking notes to solve puzzles and view your surroundings from a different lens gives these games unmistakable individuality, and reduces the risk of overwhelming new players. On top of that, it contributes so much to the spirit of the adventure in both games. Taking note of the things you see and charting your way through parts unknown was a huge part of what made the Great Sea so much fun to explore, and all of that has been distilled into this one feature. If there's one thing I'll remember these games for, it's writing on the map. Now that we've elaborated on the shared brilliance of the core gameplay of these games, we can finally start comparing and contrasting their strengths and weaknesses. Let's begin with Phantom Hourglass. Although all of the major items here are borrowed from previous games, the manner in which you use them are completely unique and take full advantage of the touchscreen. Also, the primary use for these items can sometimes be entirely different than they were in past games. Our primary items this time are the boomerang, the bow, bombs, the grappling hook, the hammer, a shovel, and believe it or not, the bomb chew. In Ocarina of Time, these little runts quickly became infamous. Since the most minute control stick movements and terrain layouts can influence their trajectory, they are some of the least reliable items in Zelda history, to the point where speedrunners perform a very specific setup in order to reliably clear the bomb chew minigame in runs. I've adopted this trick into my playthroughs of Ocarina of Time as well because, no. Phantom Hourglass revolutionizes the bomb chew by giving you complete freedom to map out its path. While bomb chew are used situationally, you can also move independently of them after you set them down, leading to some creative solutions to problems. Speaking of drawing a path, the boomerang can lock onto several targets at once and carry certain items as you'd expect, but now you have complete freedom to map out its journey. While at first glance this seems to be a simpler method of controlling the boomerang, its precise nature can also be used in instances where you need to round corners and hit switches beyond walls and obstacles. This is on full display in the Temple of Fire, but it quickly becomes a mainstay in puzzle solving and it constantly intersects with other items. You'll see examples of that as we go. You can also draw lines over certain enemies to mess them up, or even wrap around those larger enemies to stun them and open them up to attacks. Bombs are easier to use in this game than they've ever been, as you can simply tap where you want to throw them. This makes them far more viable in combat, and it just makes blowing holes in walls and floors much easier since you don't need to guess at your bomb's trajectory like you would in other Zelda games. Some might say this loses out on the feeling of developing your skills with bombs, but it also reinforces the accessible focus of Phantom Hourglass, so I'm not terribly bothered. The trade-off with the bombs being so easy to use is that they limit your default bomb bag to a mere 10 bombs, and you'll need to explore the ocean to find upgrades. But hey, any excuse to explore in a Zelda game is fine with me. Being able to tap anywhere on the screen to throw bombs translates to the control scheme of the hammer. Ciela is able to carry the hammer over a sizable radius, and being able to one-shot a Stalfos is a treat. This would make it a pretty busted weapon, but you acquire it during the game's final dungeon, so it balances itself out. This precision culminates with the bow. In other 2D Zelda games, you could only aim your bow in a few directions, while it was essential to lock onto enemies in the 3D games in order to land your shots in combat. As first-person aiming in Zelda was difficult, at least before the advent of motion control. So much so that they made mastery of it rewarding through the various archery minigames, especially the ones in Majora's Mask. Phantom Hourglass's bow controls are so simple, yet the most responsive I have ever experienced in a 2D Zelda game. You press down on the screen in the direction that you want to shoot, and the camera will automatically pan after a second to focus on that area. The hitboxes of your arrows and the enemies compensate for the vast amount of positions Link can fire an arrow from, leading to an effortless control scheme that makes ranged combat a ton of fun. Because of how viable the bow is in combat, I wanted to hunt down the quiver upgrades in the world, and once again, that's a great thing. The grappling hook distinguishes itself here from its appearance in Wind Waker. While you can still steal items and fight certain enemies with it, you can't swing on things. You primarily use it to create tight ropes between two pegs that you can cross or use as a slingshot, as well as to pull on faraway objects. The grappling hook is precisely what makes the Ice Temple so memorable. A lot of the terrain is divided up by chasms, and in order to traverse the dungeon, you'll have to pull switches from across pits and find ways to navigate across with tight ropes. Sometimes the tight ropes are used for positioning, as seen here with this puzzle where you have to stand on the rope. As for the slingshot concept, you can slingshot yourself over to other platforms, you can ricochet arrows to solve puzzles, and you eventually go on to ricochet Gleeok's fireballs at his heads. And to control it, all you need to do is draw a straight line in any direction. Despite all of the items being recycled from previous Zelda games, the control scheme invites new ways for them to be applied, and they are all a ton of fun to play with. When designing Spirit Tracks, however, the team must have realized that their previous game's item selection would be difficult to outdo. Therefore, they kept the three most useful items, the boomerang, bow, and bombs, and instead created 4 new ones, the whirlwind, the whip, the sand wand, and the spirit flute. Of course, the 3 returning items are great for the reasons I discussed earlier, so let's talk about the new ones. The spirit flute is primarily used for context-sensitive actions, like awakening gossip stones, summoning a healing fairy once per dungeon, which is great in a pinch, and effectively just serving as a replacement for the shovel when you play the Song of Discovery. Overall, the Spirit Flute doesn't really hold a candle to the Ocarina or the Wind Waker, and 2 of its songs just serve as replacements for actions that could have been performed with a sword swing or a shovel. Other than that, it's really only used to solve a handful of puzzles. On top of that, it's a bit awkward to use. You need to drag the flute around, line up with the note you want to play, and then blow into the microphone. You can seamlessly move from note to note while continuously blowing into the microphone, unless it's a more complicated song that requires you to jump a note over, in which case it feels like Plankton's harmonica solo. But the blowing doesn't stop there. In order to blow a gust from the whirlwind, you need to physically blow into the microphone. Every single time. It's not a terrible item or anything, as its primary applications like using gusts to carry things can make for decent puzzle solving and combat scenarios throughout the game, but having to constantly blow into the mic will leave anyone feeling lightheaded. Clearing the poisonous fog in the Forest Temple is probably the most egregious example of this. Keep in mind that this isn't a Wii U game or a game that is designed to be played at home. This is a portable game that is meant to be played, well, portably. Since the game is asking you to constantly blow into the microphone, it is impossible to play these parts when you're in a noisy area. This is especially apparent in a moving vehicle. I remember this all too well. You know what the DS's microphone hears in a moving car? This. Obviously, someone didn't think the microphone items through. The whip is more reminiscent of the grappling hook from Wind Waker, as you'll find yourself swinging on things to cross pits, although it still has unique applications here, like grabbing stuff from far away, stunning enemies, or retrieving parts of an enemy that you wouldn't be able to lift normally. The Ocean Temple has a neat puzzle, requiring you to match the sword patterns on the upper floors. It can be a little annoying fetching this information, but it's still fun to solve. The boss of the dungeon also makes great use of the whip, as it requires fast reflexes to throw the thorns back and reveal the weak spot. Outside of that, its applications are limited, and it makes me wish I was using the grappling hook from Wind Waker instead. It would actually make sense to include it in Spirit Tracks too, as stealing resources from enemies would benefit the train customization system. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My favorite of the new items in Spirit Tracks is the Sand Wand. Like the hammer, it appears in the last regular dungeon, and it too is extremely powerful. However, it has an edge over the hammer, as the puzzles are actually fun to solve. Let me explain. The hammer is predominantly featured in Muto's temple, wherein you can catapult Link up to higher platforms, launch boulders around, and solve some of the most annoying puzzles in the game. While the former two are unremarkable but fun to mess around with at the very least, the latter are just uninspired and obnoxious ways of utilizing the hammer. Here's how they work. When you swing your hammer, the nearby tiles will flip over. The idea is to have every tile flip to one side, or to have them create a specific formation. You can manipulate the tiles that flip by swinging your hammer in a specific spot. They repeat these puzzles constantly throughout the latter half of the dungeon, and they irritate me. They're not terribly difficult since you can use the method I mentioned earlier to trick the adjacent tiles into remaining unflipped. But is this truly the best way to utilize the hammer? I don't think so. At least fighting Eox is fun as you launch yourself towards them and swing your hammer a bunch. The Sand Wand and its accompanying dungeon, the Sand Temple, are much better than their predecessors. The Sand Wand allows you to draw a path to elevate blocks of sand. This is used to create a path through these rolling spiked pillars and other hazards, flush enemies out of the sand and open them to attacks, and push boulders and other large objects, which eventually culminates in a pair of puzzles that feel reminiscent of a Flash game I used to play. Block Soars. They are completely unique from the rest of the dungeon's puzzles, and yet they feel like the logical apex of the pathfinding and object manipulation that the Sand Wand employs. And then the boss has you bowling boulders into weak points using the sand as your weapon. I loved this dungeon. Despite the Sand Wand's advantage over the hammer, I still feel like Phantom Hourglass's item selection is more succinct, impactful, and well utilized. However, both Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks have similar strengths and weaknesses when it comes to dungeon design. In my Oracle of Seasons and Ages video, I mentioned that a great dungeon should balance two elements: a core theme that drives both the aesthetics and gameplay, as well as a dungeon item that plays into this theme and has unique applications specific to the dungeon. There are times where dungeons in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks can fit this description, but for the most part, they just feel like larger caves. I suppose this seamlessness is important for bridging the casual audience into the concept of a dungeon, but they all follow a similar progression scheme, there's no dungeon map to be found, and they all use the same generic music. Because the entire layout of the dungeon is immediately made apparent to you as soon as you enter, the suspense and memorization that goes into the early dungeon exploration is gone. Let's start with Phantom Hourglass though. Most of the settings featured in its dungeons aren't new to the Zelda series, and a lot of the hazards have been done already. Fire hazards, lava, quicksand, monsters in the sand, riding moving blocks over bottomless pits, these have all been done before, and to much greater effect. If you've played A Link to the Past, you'll have already seen pretty much all of Phantom Hourglass's recurring dungeon mechanics. Most of the dungeons blend together because of this, with small glimmers of greatness sticking out. That's not to say that dungeon theming doesn't exist in Phantom Hourglass, it'd be wrong to suggest otherwise. I've already talked about the Ice Temple, which is perhaps the best example of dungeon theming, but in the Temple of Wind, you can not only use wind to reach higher platforms, but you can also place bombs and gusts to send them upward as well. This also comes into play in the boss. It's not much, but it's charming. While the Temple of Fire may not have anything to write home about outside of the boomerang, it does demonstrate that the touch-based control scheme can organically introduce challenges in navigation, as you attempt to cross pits, dodge enemies, and avoid flames. In the Goron Temple, you can not only use Bomb Chew to hit faraway and otherwise inaccessible switches, but you can also work together with Gongoron and take full control of him to solve certain puzzles. This idea doesn't have much to do with the setting for the dungeon, but it is a lot of fun to roll around as him. You can even put your skills with Gongoron to the test later, on a secret island shaped like a Nintendo DS. Yeah, we almost got a GameCube island in Wind Waker, so here's DS Island, spelled D-E-E space E-S-S. How can you not love it? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. It feels like Muto's Temple was deliberately designed to be as annoying as possible. The first floor has two sides in which you need to solve a series of movement puzzles under a time limit. This will allow you to reach one of the two buttons that unlock the staircase to the basement. Along the way, there are trapdoors that you have to memorize, but memorization and note-taking will only get you so far when you have to move as fast as possible through claustrophobic corridors before the bridge disappears. On the second floor, there's a room where you have to painstakingly navigate through ridiculously slim paths while avoiding like-likes. This is on top of the annoying hammer puzzles I discussed earlier. It's almost funny how annoying this temple can be. But even with the annoyances in Muto's Temple, none of the dungeons come close to the lost potential of the ghost ship. If you've watched my video about The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, you'd know that the Ghost Ship quest is one of my favorite things about the game. It is the culmination of all the exploration you've done and the resourcefulness you've developed, and it is mandatory to hunt it down. The island that houses the Ghost Ship chart isn't hinted at by any of the fishmen except for the one just outside of it. Once you obtain the chart, you'll see island formations that heavily rely on you having filled out your sea chart, which is a brilliant example of the main quest and freedom to explore the ocean intermingling. There's just one problem. All that happens when you enter the ship is you're thrust into a combat challenge, you collect the Triforce chart, and it kicks you out before the ship disappears forever. It's still a cool atmospheric moment, but I always felt the designers wanted to flesh it out into a full dungeon at one point. Think about it. If I were to go through all of that anticipation and exploration, only to discover that the inside of the ghost ship is a full-fledged dungeon, that would be so beautiful. That's why I was tremendously excited to see the ghost ship return. Even if the ship is once again part of the main quest, this would be an attempt to finish what they started in Wind Waker. But it doesn't quite fill the shoes that Wind Waker left behind. Halfway through the game, Link and Linebeck will set out for the ghost ship in order to save Tetra. How do you board the ship? Well, you use the power of the 3 fairies to navigate the fog. You just follow the flashing of the fairies until you eventually board the ship. An underwhelming minigame to say the least, but when I climbed on board, I was excited to find an actually unique dungeon aesthetic. A thin layer of fog floats above the ship, and the ship is soaked in an eerie combination of dark and mysterious colors. I couldn't wait to see what lay ahead. And what did I hear as I entered the dungeon? Yeah, the same dungeon music I've been hearing since the beginning of the game. To its credit, the ghost ship at least has a unique focus. You need to save the Cubist sisters and escort them back to safety. Each area of the dungeon focuses on something different, like navigation, stealth, and the trademark note-taking and intricate puzzle solving the game has established already. But aside from escorting the sisters to safety, there isn't really anything in this dungeon that sets it apart from the rest of the game. The boss is a relatively tense game of energy tennis reminiscent of the fight with Aghanim, but that's about it. I suppose what I'm trying to demonstrate through all this is that you could honestly trade most of the puzzles featured in these dungeons between other dungeons, islands, and caves, and it wouldn't make a difference. Rarely do dungeons in this game utilize their setting to the fullest in puzzle solving. Meanwhile, the previous 2D Zelda game, the Minish Cap, had the Palace of Winds, which took full advantage of its setting and puzzle solving, whilst incorporating your existing items into its design. This is where my sentiment that Phantom Hourglass's dungeons feel like big caves stems from. They just don't have strong enough identities to warrant the title of a dungeon. The thing is, though, this simplistic approach to dungeon design is consistent throughout Phantom Hourglass. It's clear that these dungeons were not intended for veterans. By having them closely resemble the caves players have been exploring, it results in a relatively seamless experience for players unfamiliar with the flow of Zelda. In that regard, the dungeons serve their purpose well, and still feature the puzzle-solving hallmarks that I've already praised these games for. I just don't think they're meant for players like me. Speaking of the ghost ship, I'm gonna go on a brief tangent real quick. Did you know that certain items are permanently missable in Zelda games? To clarify, I'm not referring to skippable items like the ways in which speedrunners skip collecting certain masks in Majora's Mask, or skip the Triforce shards by clipping through the barrier in Wind Waker. I'm talking about non-perishable inventory items and upgrades that are gone forever if you don't collect them, like the boomerang or heart pieces in containers. Usually, the circumstances in which you miss them are obscure, or you have to deliberately go out of your way to miss them. Take this heart piece for example, awarded to you after completing Dampé's grave-digging tour. In the original version of Ocarina of Time, if you dig up the heart piece and then save and turn off the console before picking it up, or just leave the graveyard without collecting it, it disappears forever. You cannot dig it up again. While obscure, I can imagine this being devastating for a small selection of people. Then there's those rare situations in which you can choose to miss items. In the original Zelda, there are 4 hidden caves throughout Hyrule that give the player a choice between a red potion and a heart container. Considering the heart container is a permanent upgrade to your health and you can buy potions elsewhere, you'd never want to choose the potion. But if you do, the heart container is gone forever. This situation has always been hilarious to me because it's like choosing between an extra 10 years of your life and a can of Pepsi. This brings us to Phantom Hourglass, which has the funniest missable item in the entire series. After killing a dungeon boss in a Zelda game, the boss will drop a heart container. The player can then choose to either collect the heart container or simply leave the dungeon. The game gives the player this choice in case they want to challenge themselves to beat the game with a limited number of hearts, rather than forcing the upgrade on them, though you can still re-enter the dungeon and collect it if you change your mind, or if you accidentally leave without collecting it somehow. That is, except for one dungeon, the Ghost Ship in Phantom Hourglass. The Ghost Ship disappears from the ocean after you defeat the boss and exit through the portal, which means that any items you've left behind will be permanently unobtainable after that point, including the heart container. So for the sake of this video, I left the heart container behind. Here's what happens. The next time you visit the post box, the postman will deliver a letter from an unknown source that reads, Link, I heard that you rescued Tetra from the Ghost Ship. Congratulations! Well done. Haha, amazing really. Say, did you leave something important on the ship? Maybe a heart container? We grabbed it for you, so please take it. We're closely watching your epic adventure, oh scatterbrained one. From very high in the sky. The developers graciously break the fourth wall and deliver you the heart container you left behind, and even then, they still give you a choice in taking it. If you choose nope, the heart container will be gone forever, as you might have guessed. I have no idea if this little tangent is interesting to anyone else, but I love small details in Zelda games, and this is one of my favorites. I just find it hilarious that the developers interject and say, Hey, are you sure you meant to leave this behind? Anyway, that's all I have to say about the dungeons in Phantom Hourglass. But what about spirit tracks? Well, aside from the Forest Temple and its fondness for making players hyperventilate, pretty much all of the dungeons in spirit tracks are a step up from the ones in the previous game. So I might as well give credit where credit is due. We've already discussed how much fun I had in the Sand Temple and certain elements of the Ocean Temple, but there are a couple more dungeons I wanted to discuss. The second dungeon, the Snow Temple, balances so many cool ideas. Given that there are icy floors, you have your sliding block puzzles, but you can also push yourself through water with the whirlwind, a la Minish Cap. It is rather annoying having to yet again blow into the mic over and over, but once you get the boomerang, you can use the blue flames from torches to create icy paths over the water. You can use regular fire from these torches to melt snow and ice and find the way forward, and the sliding block puzzles culminate in you pushing these bells into the correct place so that they can play the right notes in a song. It's a cool central mechanic. At one point you even have to figure out how to push these blocks over the water, and the boss has you throw your boomerang between the red and blue flames to melt him down. The residual flames on the ground are both hazards and weapons. The Fire Temple, again, not to be confused with the Temple of Fire, is also pretty great. It once again demonstrates how the stylus-based control scheme can drive difficulty in platforming and navigation. And while it does feature the typical fire and lava-based hazards you've come to expect, it throws minecarts into the mix. These minecarts are first introduced without any real danger, and you have to hit switches to change their paths as you're moving along. After that, you have to hit switches and shoot targets as you're flying by, or risk death in the process. Then you have to seat the big key in a separate minecart while simultaneously managing paths. This all culminates in the dungeon boss, and what a fight it is. After grabbing one of those geyser platforms from a falling rock, you can hop aboard a minecart and put your accuracy to the test. The feeling of successfully landing your shots while on the move, combined with the audio-visual feedback of the lava spurting out of each weak point, is euphoric. The Fire Temple also reintroduced a mechanic from Phantom Hourglass with a new twist. Essentially, you had to first hit these orbs in order to change the direction your arrows will travel in. Then, shoot an arrow at the first orb in the chain and watch the arrow reach its destination. In this game, you can lift the orbs and move them to their destination. Later, this idea is combined with the concept of throwing platforms onto lava geysers so that you can reach a target higher than your arrows can reach. Now, despite singling out certain aspects of these dungeons for praise, they are still fairly simple in comparison to the complex, iconic dungeon designs of other Zelda games. This is done with purpose, mind you, and Spirit Tracks especially compensates for this decision through creative mechanics, but none of these dungeons can really compare to other Zelda games. They're in their own ballpark entirely, for better or worse. Spirit Tracks has a slight edge over its predecessor, but it's like comparing a glass of water to a glass of water with ice in it. One is slightly more enjoyable than the other, but they both pale in comparison to a finely aged wine like A Link to the Past. nor do they truly quench my thirst for great Zelda dungeons. With that said, let's take a look at what the world looks like outside of those dungeons. In Phantom Hourglass, you sail through 4 ocean quadrants and discover islands, both charted and uncharted. In Spirit Tracks, you drive through 5 realms in these 4 quadrants: the Forest Realm, the Snow Realm, the Fire Realm, and the Ocean Realm, with the Sand Realm being tucked away in the northwest area of the Ocean Realm. Phantom Hourglass allows you to freely draw a path for your boat, whereas Spirit Tracks restricts you to the train tracks that are presently available to you. While Spirit Tracks might seem more restrictive in that regard, you can at least switch tracks, control your train's speed, and throw it in reverse independently of the path you've drawn. If you're trying to control your boat during maritime combat, you are at the mercy of the path you've drawn, so you'll likely find yourself redrawing your path as you try to circle enemies. Anyway, despite their similarities in structure, both games handle their overworld and discoverable goodies in different ways. Perhaps the biggest loss in segmenting the overworlds like this is the ability to freely explore for potential upgrades. The Wind Waker's Great Sea may have sent you in a straight line between Windfall, Dragon Roost, and the Forest Haven, but from there, it was entirely open-ended. Phantom Hourglass's ocean also doesn't divide its islands by squares, instead allowing the islands to be placed virtually anywhere, which makes discovering those secret uncharted islands even more exciting. With that said, it is slightly disappointing that you slowly inch your way through 4 separate parts of the ocean. This structure does give the game time to introduce concepts without overwhelming the player, in a similar manner to the Wind Waker's first few hours. It also makes a lot more sense in Spirit Tracks, as each realm is completely different from the last in visuals and gameplay. The Snow Realm has you face a snowstorm and low visibility, the Ocean Realm has you dive underwater and fire torpedoes at your enemies, while also avoiding the dark trains hot on your trail. The Fire Realm has you hunting down the keys to the Fire Temple while avoiding falling rocks from the nearby volcano, while the Sand Realm has you solving plenty of puzzles solely based on environmental clues. The realms can also play off of each other, requiring players to travel between realms to retrieve things that are normally inaccessible to the citizens of each realm, like Goron Iron, Ice, or Lumber, and you can find warp gates that take you between specific realms. However, while the quadrants of Spirit Tracks are significantly more fleshed out than Phantom Hourglass, all of its coolest moments happen along the main quest. This is where I'd make a joke about the game literally railroading you, but you know what? I'm better than that. Kind of. Meanwhile, that island shaped like a whale in Phantom Hourglass? Completely optional, and there's plenty more where that came from. Let's talk about the optional stuff that helps you along your journey. Equipment upgrades, heart containers, all that stuff, as they significantly contribute to the gameplay loop of any Zelda game. Starting with Phantom Hourglass, we have the Gems of Power, Wisdom, and Courage. Collecting at least 10 of each respective gem will grant Link additional strength. After 10 Power Gems, Link does double damage. 10 Wisdom Gems, Link takes half the amount of damage he usually does. 10 Courage Gems, he can shoot a beam from his sword. There are 20 of each type of gem hidden across the islands, ocean, and dungeons, and you can only have one of these powers equipped at a time. Because of how intimate combat can be with the touchscreen, I had great reason to hunt these things down. The island where you turn them in is completely invisible on your sea chart, however, with only a single gossip stone hinting toward its location. All you have to do in order to find it is venture out into the unknown. This is the heart of the Wind Waker, alive and beating once again. In order to get stronger, you learn and explore the world. This is true for other collectibles too. I mentioned the starting bomb bag size being small to balance their power, so naturally I scoured the ocean for an upgrade. There are 2 bomb bag upgrades in this game. One is purchasable for 1,000 rupees at Beetle's shop ship, and the other is a reward for completing a canon minigame hosted by Salvatore. You have no idea how excited I was to see this guy return from Wind Waker. His puppet shows have gotten even more elaborate. You have to give credit to this guy for enhancing the atmosphere of his games. In order to access his minigame, you have to bomb through a wall. No other person in this world would think to do this just to have a go at his minigame. In Wind Waker, his minigames were accessible to anyone, or in Spectacle Island's case, anyone with a boat. But here it's as if he's specifically waiting for you to play his game. He missed you. Even after you leave, Salvatore will send you a letter with an attached Wisdom Gem. I love this guy. I'll play Sploosh Kaboom with you any day, buddy. The minigame itself is incredibly challenging. You need to shoot targets while constantly moving on a set path. The red targets can be shot repeatedly for 20 points per hit, while the blue targets are harder to hit but can be shot once for 100 points. The timing is strict for nabbing the high score, but to balance this out, the cannon's control scheme is far better than Wind Waker's. You tap something, and your bomb will lock onto it so long as you aren't too far away or at a strange angle. In this case, you can compensate with some trick shots. It's a tough minigame, but having an extra 10 bombs at all times is well worth the effort. As for other upgrades, you can get 2 Bomb Chew Bag upgrades from purchasing one for 1,000 rupees and earning another in a Goron Race minigame on DS Island, which has you smashing through gems on a time limit in a DS-shaped racetrack. But nothing comes close to the Quiver upgrade minigame. It is the ultimate test of your proficiency with the bow, and one of the hardest minigames I've ever played in a Zelda game. On Melita Island, Romanos hosts a shooting gallery minigame where you can obtain a random treasure for 1,300 points, a quiver upgrade for 1,700 points, and a heart container for 2,000 points. You have 70 seconds to shoot the targets. One target is worth 10 points, and each consecutive target hit, without missing, increases its point value by another 10 points, going from 20 to 30 to 40, and capping out at 50. The idea is to hit as many targets as possible, without missing, so that you're consistently earning 50 points per shot. The targets don't make this easy. At first they flip over and remain stationary. Then more come in at once, requiring you to act faster before they disappear. After that, they continue to move after flipping over, and they throw in targets that cost you 50 points. It's also worth mentioning that the quicker you land your shots, the faster new targets will come out. After a few mistakes, it becomes virtually impossible to reach 2,000 points unless you have godlike reflexes. As you could probably guess, this is one of the strictest and most demanding quests in the entire game, and possibly one of the hardest minigames in the entire series. It is somehow stricter than Majora's shooting galleries, albeit with much more responsive controls. This also makes for some of the most fun I've had shooting a bow in a Zelda game. By completing this minigame, that heart container becomes proof of your mastery with the bow. And honestly, I love that. Oh, don't worry, this minigame definitely infuriated me. I took out my anger on Romanos at one point, and they have an animation of him jumping over your arrows as if the developers knew that people would get mad enough to try this. Yeah, the minigame is incredibly strict, and it's not going to be for everyone. The highest score I've been able to obtain is 2050, which just barely qualified me for the heart container after about 45 minutes of attempts. This is one instance where playing on a big screen is an absolute must. It becomes much easier to lead your shots when it's easier to see the game. I had to switch to my DSi XL just for this heart container. But I walked away from this minigame feeling like I had just mastered the bow, and that is what I believe a great Zelda minigame should do. Speaking of which, we should talk about the heart containers in Phantom Hourglass. And no, not heart pieces as you might have come to expect, full heart containers. Link can collect these heart containers to increase his health to a total of 16 hearts, much like the original Legend of Zelda. While 7 of them are collected from the game's dungeons, 6 of them are scattered across the ocean. While at first it might seem jarring to abandon the satisfaction of collecting 4 heart pieces to form a container, Phantom Hourglass doesn't have the luxury of running on the same platform that powered Wind Waker. As such, the ocean needs to balance multiple collectibles in a smaller space. To balance this out, the discoverable heart containers are intentionally grueling, and require mastery over specific concepts. We've already discussed the brutality of the shooting gallery, but now let's discuss something slightly more laid back. Fishing. It's always been surprising to me that fishing wasn't featured in a game that predominantly takes place in an ocean. I mean, Wind Waker had the fishmen that gave you clues and filled out your sea chart, but that's it. Phantom Hourglass attempts to rectify this, and it's awesome. Challenging and occasionally dull, but representative of real fishing in that regard. In the northwest quadrant of the ocean, you can sail to a place called Benan Island, which is home to the old Wayfarer. By convincing him that Jolene's sister Joanne is a real mermaid, he will give you his old fishing rod as thanks. Between this and teaching a song to a group of fish eggs, I think I've grown numb to how absurd Zelda quests can get. Anyway, from there it's time to start fishing. As soon as the fish bites, you need to immediately pull down on the touchscreen. From here, you reel in the fish as you would in real life, but you need to watch the meter on the left. You don't want to be reeling in fish in the red, otherwise you'll lose your catch. When in the red, you need to pull away from the direction the fish is traveling in order to recover. As you start catching bigger fish, this balancing act becomes much more difficult, but immensely satisfying. At first you'll need to catch 3 different fish, but once you turn those in, you'll need to sail around until a rusty swordfish appears on your map, and after that, the legendary Neptuna. I think the intent was for these fish to appear while on the water for extended periods of time, and while this was the case for me at first, while hunting for the Neptuna, I did end up just sitting in one place and waiting for it to appear. If it didn't show up, I'd just dock at the nearest island and start waiting again. It isn't uncommon for it to show up or anything, it just doesn't always show itself after a minute or two. This might sound incredibly repetitive, but I feel like it represents real fishing quite accurately in that regard. There are bound to be lulls in activity as you wait for the fish to appear, but as soon as that legendary fish appears, you immediately make a beeline for it and start carefully balancing the meter. The minigame is just as much about calculated risks and critical thinking as it is fast reflexes. Simple controls, but with a surprising amount of depth and challenge that gradually reveals itself. Phantom Hourglass just might have my favorite fishing sim in a video game. Yakuza, Animal Crossing, Minecraft, these games all have fishing, but they really only require you to press certain buttons at a specific time. They are meant to feel tranquil and casual in nature. But Zelda's fishing minigames have historically strived to have players earn their rewards and master their fishing rods. Phantom Hourglass takes this to heart, as you'll need to explore in order to find the quest and the different species of fish in the first place. And it is a constant tug-of-war that involves you in the process from start to finish, which is much truer to real-life fishing without feeling completely out of place. Trying to reel in the rusty swordfish and especially Neptuna, and feeling their weight in the sensitivity of the meter on the left, was an anxious and taxing process, but hunting them down, finally catching them and turning them in for a heart container remains one of my fondest memories with this game. A dream I've always had for Wind Waker has been fulfilled. There's another heart container that can be obtained if you manage to hunt down a ship that looks awfully similar to a certain boat from a previous adventure. You can challenge him to a duel and attempt to land 100 hits on him in the same manner as Orca on Outset Island. This is a great test of your reflexes with the primary control scheme. And although it isn't as difficult as something like the shooting gallery, it still tests you on a concept that you've become familiar with. But no, if you want a challenge, an unrelenting trial full of pain and torment, look no further than Maze Island. I tend to be hyperbolic a lot in my videos, but I am dead serious when I say that without a guide, Maze Island is the absolute hardest minigame, side quest, or thing I have ever experienced in a Zelda game. Here's the concept. When you pay the entry fee, the Gossip Stone will flash the locations of its siblings across the map of the island. They only stay up for a brief period of time, so you need to jot them down quickly. You can use all of your items to make things easier, like placing a bomb below you to hit a switch, so that you can continue on the upper path without having to jump down. Certain items are also required, like the bow to hit targets and the grappling hook to slingshot yourself. You need to switch items in real time and navigate the various corridors flawlessly while referring to your map, all under an invisible time limit that keeps ticking down. There are 3 difficulty levels: Beginner, Normal, and Expert. Beginner asks you to hit 4 Gossip Stones around the maze, Normal wants you to hit 8, while Expert asks you to hit all 14 stones. The maze is divided in such a way that you can't access parts of the island at will. You will need to plan out an intricate route that optimizes your movement between each Gossip Stone, and you'll need to figure out which Gossip Stones should be hit before others. Of course, if you follow a guide, this will become much less difficult, but I'm not one to back down from a fight in a Zelda game. I pieced everything together based on my various failed runs of the maze. After over an hour of attempts, I finally managed to nail a route down and I earned that heart container, along with 300 rupees as a consolation prize for throwing my money at the challenge. This minigame is so difficult for a few reasons. 1. You need to throw yourself at it multiple times in order to learn, which means you will inevitably fail multiple times. 2. Optimizing your movement is incredibly difficult thanks to the multitude of narrow corridors and walkways at different levels of elevation, and almost any mistake is too much. 3. Not being able to see the timer sucks. It causes so much anxiety, which can lead to stupid mistakes as you're trying to go fast. It's a vicious cycle. And yet, despite all of this, I think Maze Island is brilliant. If you get especially detailed in your notes, it becomes a lot easier to create routes, and memorization will become a thing of the past. In that regard, it is exactly what I've come to expect from the core gameplay of Phantom Hourglass. It is a culmination of everything I've been doing through various temples and islands, and for that reason, I love it dearly. Its difficulty also sheds light on why you're collecting full heart containers and not heart pieces in this game. I mean, the actual reason probably relates to the DS's hardware limitations, but in order to compensate, the team made most of the heart containers a real challenge to obtain, equivalent to collecting 4 heart pieces in another Zelda game. There are also 2 purchasable heart containers in Phantom Hourglass. One of them appears in any island shop for 2,000 rupees, and the other appears on Beetle's ship for 1,500, but only at certain times of day. Unless you change the time on your DS's internal clock like a filthy cheater. These are a far cry from the 950 rupees Beetle asked you to fork over in Wind Waker for a single heart piece, and they heavily encourage you to invest time into collecting treasures and ship parts, as they are the quickest ways to make money. You can obtain treasures and ship parts by doing just about anything across the map. Finding treasure chests, clearing minigames and side quests, salvaging treasure from the bottom of the sea using your collected treasure charts, which also return from Wind Waker, among other things. This is why failing the shooting gallery so many times can still be lucrative, as you'll be given a random treasure or ship part as long as you cross that first threshold. You can also obtain a ship part if you hit the self-proclaimed Hero of Winds over 200 times. Ship parts are used for customizing your ship, as you could have guessed. 3 parts from a set grant your ship an extra heart, 6 grants you 2 extra hearts, while a complete set grants you an extra 3. There are 8 sets to collect parts from, giving you a nice variety to collect. Here's where things get a bit problematic. As far as I can tell, the treasure and ship parts you obtain are all completely random depending on the seed for your save file, as is their value. This excludes the golden set, which is always ultra rare and not worth collecting for. All you get when you collect the full gold set is an extra 4 hearts. The more of the game you explore, the more treasure and ship parts you obtain, the more money you make. You can sell your treasures and duplicate ship parts on Murkay Island to profit from your adventures, which I'm sure would make Linebeck proud. You can sell treasures for set prices of 50, 150, 800, or 1500 rupees. I actually had more fun seeing which treasures could turn the biggest profit than I did beefing up my ship. Sure, there's plenty of reason to do so, as enemies can swarm you at any turn in the ocean, and it does prepare you for one of the phases of the final boss, but more rupees means being able to buy heart containers, potions, and countless other items and upgrades. In that regard, the game is balanced pretty well. Pretty much everything you do could result in you getting rich, which creates an endless feedback loop of exploration, gameplay, and rewards. On the other hand, it's completely random what you actually obtain. I am probably only singing this system's praises because my save file happened to pin high values on treasures that I happened to discover. It's all based on luck, and when you implement luck in a series as rigid and sequential as Zelda, it is destined to become controversial. If you can believe it, the save file seed generation was implemented in this game because they wanted players to trade with one another over Nintendo Wi-Fi connection or wireless play. Excluding Four Swords and Triforce Heroes, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks remain the only mainline Zelda games to include multiplayer. Unless you count the Tingle Tuner, which I do, so Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, and Wind Waker are the only mainline Zelda games with multiplayer. Man, these 3 games remain connected, even in the strangest ways. Anyway, there's a battle mode that puts you and a friend against one another. One player controls the Phantoms, while the other controls Link, as they both attempt to steal Force Gems from each other. Honestly, it isn't anything to write home about, but the trading system is. If you and a friend were both playing through this game, you could hypothetically assist each other in completing your sets and making a huge profit, as their save file will generate a completely different seed with different treasure and ship part values. You could hypothetically trade items that are cheap in your game to them, where they are much more valuable, and vice versa. Think turnip selling in Animal Crossing, where you compare turnip prices with your friends and sell them to the village that offers the highest amount. This was a neat idea for its time, but Nintendo essentially prevented future generations from experiencing this. The Wii U Virtual Console can't do it at all, and the Nintendo Wi-Fi connectivity has long since died. The only way to continue trading parts would be to jump through hoops in emulation, unless you happen to have 2 DS consoles and 2 copies of the game with 2 different save files ready to go. In the end, most players will remain blissfully unaware of this system, leading to those unlucky few that get a bad seed getting frustrated as they try to turn a profit with their random treasures. Spirit Tracks aims to provide a solution for this system, but it too has positives and negatives. Train parts and treasures once again appear in Spirit Tracks, only this time, treasures are used to craft train parts. So if you decide to venture out into the unknown and collect treasures in uncharted territory, or attempt to win treasures through the postal system, your efforts will not be in vain. There's just one problem. Actually, there are several, but here's just one. While the requirements for each train part are not randomized, and the prices for treasure are consistent across save files, 50 rupees, 150 rupees, and 500 rupees, the treasures that spawn in treasure chests and other locations are still random, at least to an extent. Treasures all spawn randomly under certain parameters pertaining to the rarity of the treasure. There are 5 common types of treasure, 5 uncommon types of treasure, and 4 rare types of treasure. Essentially, depending on the difficulty of each treasure chest you open, each minigame you clear, or whatever, the game will randomly give you a corresponding treasure. It's a much smarter way to balance the luck-based element of Phantom Hourglass, but it can still be frustrating to not receive the treasures you need to develop train parts. 2 types of treasure have a finite amount. There are only 3 alchemy stones in the entire game, and 2 regal rings, which excludes the one you give to Lineback III. Both of these treasures have a set value of 2,500 rupees, but if you're going for the golden train, which requires 2 alchemy stones and 2 regal rings, you can only sell 1 alchemy stone. This is assuming you actually manage to find all of these treasures. Of course, if you didn't know this and you sell a regal ring, the golden set will never be obtainable. So don't make that mistake. The thing is, these treasure requirements can be really steep. Keep in mind that each treasure you find is still random, so in order to complete the set, you will need to do as many side quests and open as many treasure chests as you can. If you want to upgrade your train, you need to experience pretty much everything the game has to offer. That's fine enough encouragement to get out there, but there's no guarantee the treasure you want will spawn after completing a minigame. Let's say you blow through the endurance run in Castletown and earn yourself a rare treasure, but it isn't the one you need. No worries. You might not feel like doing that quest again, but if you retry the whip minigame in Whittleton Village, you can get yourself another rare treasure. It ends up not being the one you want once again. Okay, well, thankfully you can still purchase certain common, uncommon, and rare treasures at shops, so they do compensate for the randomness a bit. But how awkward is it that you have to do 2 side quests just to get 1 rare treasure for your train? What if you were trying to build the stagecoach train, which requires 4 ancient gold pieces? How often would you be doing this, and how many rare treasures would you have to sell? And when you're saving certain treasures to develop train parts, you know what you can't do? You can't sell them. And what did this game decide to do? This game makes the incredible decision to charge 2,000 rupees for one of its heart containers, and 5,000 rupees for another, for a total of 7,000 rupees. 7,000. To be fair, one of them is given to you by spending 5,000 rupees at Beetle's shop, which you'll probably end up doing if you care enough about upgrading your train, but that's a lot of money you're going to be spending if you want to grab everything in this game. And when you can't make money because you're saving materials to build your train parts, that just hurts the entire game's economy as a result. Anyway, when all is said and done, I don't think all of this crap is worth it. By equipping 1 part from a set, you get an extra heart, and you can only have 2 extra hearts on your train by completing the full set. Obviously, the golden train lets you have more than this, but after going through all that effort, you only get 2 hearts for your train. It's not great, especially when you consider the fact that there are dark trains on the tracks that solely exist to prevent you from progressing, and kill you in 1 hit no matter what. If anything, the extra hearts are only good for the final boss, but I'll save that for later. So that's the train part system in a nutshell, which both fixes old issues and introduces new ones at the same time. As it turns out, adding randomness to a game like Zelda is just asking for trouble. Not that it can't be done, but this might not have been the way to do it. But that's just one aspect of the game's systems. What about everything else? Honestly, I think this game's overworld, although fun in the context of the main quest, is underwhelming pretty much everywhere else. That might seem harsh, but I hope you'll come to understand why I feel this way. First of all, rabbits. Across the game, you can find and capture up to 50 runaway rabbits. According to this guy, the rabbit will try to run from you, but only because it likes being chased. How about that? Anyway, the rewards for these rabbits are rather pitiful. After collecting only 1/10 of the rabbits in the overworld, you are already given a heart container. A far cry from Phantom Hourglass for sure, but do you know what you get for collecting all 50 of them? The ability to shoot a beam from your sword. Yeah, the same ability you get from collecting 10 courage gems in Phantom Hourglass is unlocked by scouring the entire map for every single one of these critters. Then there's the stamps. There are 20 stamp stations across the game's various villages, dungeons, and stations, and Nico will reward you for filling your stamp book. After finding half of them, you get a shield that cannot be eaten by like-likes. It's the same shield that this Link's predecessor used in Phantom Hourglass, but other than that, that's all it's good for. After 15 stamps, you get to wear your engineer clothes instead of the green tunic, and after 20 of them, you get the Great Spin Attack. Compare this to Phantom Hourglass, wherein the attack is a reward for completing a trading sequence with only 5 stops, each stop being another boardable ship. This rewards you for having visited these ships and knowing where to look, whereas Spirit Tracks has you painstakingly checking every single station and even every dungeon for a stamp to collect. Unfortunately, directly comparing this to how the same reward is obtained in Phantom Hourglass makes it seem less worthwhile. Sure, it's a powerful move, but it wasn't worth combing every inch of every location to me. Finally, there's the Force Gems. Force Gems are awarded to you after completing certain side quests, usually involving delivering characters to their destination or transporting goods from place to place. Upon collecting them, they open up a completely different part of the world that once lacked train tracks, meaning more opportunities to find rabbits, collect stamps, find more treasures, and even a couple of heart containers. As a concept, this is pretty cool. Even if I don't think all of the collectibles can always be worth it, the notion of unlocking more tracks by doing side quests and potentially finding shortcuts to other areas through these tracks creates a similar feedback loop to Phantom Hourglass. However, here's why I was never a huge fan of the Force Gem system. This might seem purely subjective, and I'm not sure if anyone else feels the same way, but I don't think these transportation quests are very fun to complete. And when a lot of the overworld hinges on them, that is very bad. When transporting someone to a station, you have to make sure that you follow the rules of the road. Otherwise they'll get mad at you and they won't reward you with a treasure. You have to ease into every stop, slow down before throwing your train in reverse, obey traffic signs, and all that stuff. Look, I enjoy going choo-choo when a sign tells me to and easing into a stop as much as the next guy, but these quests are all virtually identical, the only differences being the routes you take and the things you deliver. When delivering goods, each item in your freight car will have a different condition for success. Kukos will flee when the freight car is attacked, Mega Ice will slowly melt outside of the Snow Realm, Goron Lumber will cool outside of the Fire Realm, etc. You'll have to move fast without being too careless, otherwise you'll have to start all over. These are all glorified fetch quests, with some of them being mandatory for progression. I don't enjoy doing these quests, and therefore I wanted to avoid completing them. Seems like a pretty respectable stance to take, right? If you don't like doing something, just leave it alone. Zelda games usually give you free reign to tackle its side content however you like anyway. Except, that isn't actually the case with Force Gems. Multiple shortcuts between each realm are unlocked by completing side quests involving the freight car, which can also give you access to warp gates that make traveling between different sides of the map a breeze. Basically, if you want to make navigation easier on yourself, you must complete these quests, which means you'll be traveling through the same areas an awful lot. I also alluded to heart containers being obtainable after collecting Force Gems, right? Well, 2 heart containers are locked behind seemingly unrelated Force Gem side quests. The one obtained from the minigame in the pirate hideout, and the one obtained from the Ends of the Earth station in the Sand Realm. My point is that if you aren't invested in completing these delivery quests, you will miss out on a lot of potential rewards and easier navigation. The delivery quests aren't always awful, as each item gimmick introduces a novel variable to how you travel by train. In that regard, the train is more fleshed out than the boat, and these quests give navigation with the train purpose. I can at least attest to that, and to be honest, it is very rewarding to clear the most difficult Force Gem quests because you planned out that perfect route. But most of the time, these quests are just really dull. And like I said, a lot of the game's feedback loop depends on them being completed. You will have no idea which routes, warp points, and stations you'll be missing out on until you clear various, seemingly unrelated and random, delivery quests. And that is a very strange way to structure an overworld. It made me miss the days where if I wanted to go somewhere, I could just go. But perhaps the worst part about Spirit Tracks Overworld is that because of the railroad system, you will be trekking through areas you've already visited constantly. In Wind Waker, this occurred after you've already visited most of the ocean, and there wasn't much left to do except clean up the remaining treasure charts and pay off your debt to Tingle. With the Discovery gone, all that was left was busy work. Phantom Hourglass attempted to rectify this with its compact size and quests on the ocean, like fishing and ship part hunting, but it lacked the nuance of the Great Sea's design, took a more linear approach, and just had you fighting a bunch of monsters and battleships by spamming them with the cannon. In Spirit Tracks, there's only so much they can do to prevent the repetition of following the railroad constantly. There's only so many times I can shoot enemies and go choo-choo through the same routes until it gets boring, especially if you're aiming to collect Force Gems and see more of the world. All of this to say, I vastly prefer the Overworld of Phantom Hourglass. I'm sorry, I really tried to appreciate Spirit Tracks' Overworld, but I felt like it was blundering its own potential at every step. The main quest more than makes up for it, but the Overworld is simply impossible for me to ignore. If there's one thing Spirit Tracks' Overworld has over Phantom Hourglass, it's the music. No other overworld theme in Zelda sounds quite like it, and few get me as pumped to venture out into parts unknown. The train's engine even syncs up with the percussion of the song at full speed. This overworld theme is legendary, and even if I didn't always love what I was doing in Spirit Tracks' Overworld, at least this theme got me excited to be a part of it. Well, there's only two major gameplay elements left to talk about. Let's jump into the Temple of the Ocean King and the Tower of Spirits. Let's start with the former. The Temple of the Ocean King is without a doubt the most controversial aspect of Phantom Hourglass. Here's how it works. You see these squares? These are safe zones. When you step outside of these zones, the titular Phantom Hourglass will start counting down. If a Phantom Guard sees you when you're running around, you need to sprint back to a safe zone. If you get hit by the guard, time will be taken out of your hourglass and you'll be sent to the floor's entrance. At first, you'll only need to clear a few floors within the time limit. Then you'll beat a dungeon and have to come back. From there, you'll have a little more time thanks to each dungeon boss granting you more Sands of Hours, and you can even find Sands of Hours in the overworld, but you'll have to clear the floors you cleared last time in addition to all of the new floors they throw at you. Wash, rinse, repeat for the rest of the game. Almost every time you clear a dungeon, you'll come back for more. In total, the Temple of the Ocean King features 13 floors, which means you'll be repeating its earlier floors several times throughout a single playthrough. This absolutely kills the pacing of the game for most people, and sinks the game into this formulaic and predictable structure that would put Skyward Sword to shame. I mean, at least Skyward Sword had a purpose for its structure despite all of its problems. This is just extreme. When I describe Phantom Hourglass as an accessible Zelda game, this excludes the Temple of the Ocean King entirely. However, if you are willing to look past the repetition like I was, you will find that the Temple of the Ocean King encompasses everything that Phantom Hourglass is about. First of all, the puzzles in this temple are usually fun to solve the first time around, which is on brand for Phantom Hourglass. Floors 7 to 9 employ a ton of lateral thinking as you attempt to transport the 3 key gems through each floor and around the Phantom Guards, while floor 6 has you discern a pattern to write on the door that reveals itself to be an hourglass. Doing these puzzles repeatedly wouldn't be as fun, and when you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna spend a lot of time trying to figure things out. That's where the brilliance of this temple comes to light. Your first clue into the temple's true nature appears as you bring new items into old floors. You can use bombs and the bow to skip puzzles on earlier floors when you only had the boomerang. Then, as puzzles get more complex and you begin to forget the solutions, you'll find that there is absolutely no way to clear this temple optimally without taking notes. The very thing that drives a lot of Phantom Hourglass's design allows gameplay in the Temple of the Ocean King to thrive. After coming to this realization, I took note of basically everything. I mentioned Charlie from Always Sunny in a previous puzzle? Well, these scrawlings would make you think I've been hunting Pepe Sylvia my whole life. Although you might not be able to discern my system from looking at these scrollings, they help me optimize my movement and master each floor. I was skipping puzzles and taking as little time as possible to perform the necessary tasks. The Temple of the Ocean King conditions its players to speedrunning, which is kind of incredible. The speed in which I eventually came to complete these floors felt like the climax of the skills I developed, with my items and my note-taking. After clearing the dungeon for the first time, you can come back and try to beat your best time for increased odds of pulling a golden ship part, and every single treasure chest will respawn, giving you more opportunities to collect treasure. However, I haven't ever felt inclined to do this. The Temple of the Ocean King may be less of a chore now because I've memorized and mastered its floors and planned out my route, but that doesn't make it any less repetitive to put myself through. Although my conclusion over the speedrun-driven design of this temple is totally valid, some people won't really give a damn about how fast you can go. There's a good chance that all they'll see is repetition and annoyance, even if you can speed things up with diligence. And to be honest, I don't really blame you if you still feel this way. I swear, if I ever have to hear those little flying alarms beeping again, I might lose it. Taking notice of how controversial the Temple of the Ocean King was with players, the team took a different approach to the Tower of Spirits. And I love it. At the beginning of the game, Princess Zelda's spirit leaves her body as the big bad attempts to use it as a vessel for the Demon King Malladus. Link and Zelda's spirit end up working together as they attempt to unify the fragmented Tower of Spirits throughout the game. On certain floors, you'll be able to collect 3 tiers of light by sneaking around phantom guards and solving puzzles. Upon doing this, you'll be able to slay the phantoms and allow Zelda to possess the now vacant suit of armor. Zelda can walk through hazards that Link cannot, meaning that the two of them constantly have differing and intersecting applications for puzzle solving. At first, you need to use the items you've obtained in dungeons to solve puzzles, but once you've collected those tiers, Zelda can carry Link across on her shield to reach higher places and cross lava, she can distract guards and do plenty of other things. And Link's items can also create a path for her when she needs help, like when she can't cross sand or she needs to escape from a separate room. Floor 20 of the Tower of Spirits. Remember how you can lift these orbs now? You can have Zelda carry you through the lava to place them along the platforms and create a long chain that unlocks the stairs to the next floor. Or how about having Zelda carry you around while using the sand wand to make sure she doesn't sink? There's a lot of potential for complex puzzle solving, and the Tower of Spirits realizes that potential. As you ascend further up the tower, you'll discover different types of armor for Zelda to possess. Phantom Hourglass had different types of phantoms that would run faster and warp to Link's location, but these pale in comparison to the types of phantoms in Spirit Tracks, and they don't just work against you in this game. For example, this segment of the tower is shrouded in darkness unless you use the fire swords of the phantoms to guide your way. There's no map to follow either, so you can also create your own map based on the paths you've taken. Far more subtle than Phantom Hourglass and much less stressful. Once Zelda is able to possess them, you can use her light to find secrets you've missed and discern a pattern to move through the exit. In the next phase of the tower, there are phantoms that warp to your location once alerted by these oh-so-annoying little drones. Thankfully, with the right suit of armor, Zelda can actually warp to these drones when you draw a path to them. I absolutely loved this puzzle on floor 15. These drones can only follow a set path, and if it just went a little further and over the sand, you'd be able to have Zelda warp to the other side. As it turns out, you need to use the whirlwind to stun the drone and push it across the sand, and then quickly warp before the drone wakes up or before the other phantoms attack you. This puzzle made me feel like a genius, and there's plenty more ahead. The next type of phantom can roll through rocks and enemies, and although I was initially underwhelmed by its applications, the final floors of the Tower of Spirits throw every single type of phantom into the mix at once, while also allowing Link to use all of his items. Warps, darkness, and rolling around all thrown into the same puzzles, with plenty of opportunities to incorporate items into the mix. You'll also need to go up and down to different floors in order to work through bits and pieces of each puzzle, and each floor focuses on a separate central theme. This phase rocks. The overall layout of the tower also gets gradually more complicated, with these panels that swap Link and Zelda's positions, multiple locked doors, corridors and areas that divide Link and Zelda in different ways. Man, I love the Tower of Spirits. Everything that the game has taught you comes together in some of the most fun I've had between both of these games. It would honestly take me hours to talk about every single puzzle that makes this place as fun as it is. But when I said the main quest more than makes up for a weak overworld, I wasn't just talking about the dungeons and bosses. I was also referring to the Tower of Spirits. It's that good. And the best part about this place, aside from the awesome puzzles, is that you don't need to repeat old floors once you've completed them. After finishing a dungeon, you come back to the Tower of Spirits and simply move on to the next phase of the tower. And as your trip up the stairs grows longer, the more the tower's music accompanies you. Perhaps my favorite part about this whole Link and Zelda dynamic is how the characters grow closer over the course of the game. Zelda finally plays a crucial role in progressing the story, instead of simply being a damsel in distress. I mean, her spiritless body was being held captive still, but she and Link became friends and worked towards defeating Malladus together, right to the very end of the game. The two of them seem to have great chemistry. Zelda is scathingly honest sometimes, but she isn't annoying or overbearing at any point. Zelda's characterization and role in the main quest were both a breath of fresh air. Even Wind Waker couldn't seem to back down from holding Tetra captive at the end of the game, but she did end up helping Link defeat Ganondorf in the end. This fight paralleled the climactic battle of Ocarina of Time, seemingly giving Ganondorf what he always wanted, even if it meant he would inevitably be defeated. It feels as though Zelda is mirroring Tetra's resolve by assisting Link throughout this game, even calling Tetra by her preferred name when praying during the final battle, rather than using the name that was thrust on her by fate, Princess Zelda. Speaking of which, let's round this video out by discussing the stories and finales of each game. Phantom Hourglass begins with Nico retelling the events of the Wind Waker through his paper cutouts. Link is unenthused, but I admire Nico's talent after being depicted as the lowest ranked pirate on Tetra's ship. The basic plot is that Tetra is kidnapped by the ghost ship and turned to stone, and with the help of Oshus' infinite wisdom, Link, Ciela, and the selfish and cowardly Captain Linebeck must explore the world of the Ocean King for a way to enter the ghost ship, rescue Tetra, and eventually defeat the evil Bellum. Linebeck is the linchpin of Phantom Hourglass's narrative, despite appearances. All he seems to care about is treasure. If Link's adventures can make him rich, then he's willing to sail with him. When Oshus reveals himself as the Ocean King, and that there was no treasure aboard the ghost ship all along, Linebeck immediately tries to abandon Link, until Oshus promises him one wish for defeating Bellum, and he springs back into action. Linebeck might seem like a jerk now, but knowing the Zelda series' tendency to have endearing characters that act abrasive all the time, I knew he would eventually grow on me. As the blacksmith Zaz once said, "Humans always think that unless they say something, others won't hear them. Truth is, people talk just as loudly with their hearts." Throughout the game, you will constantly be pursued by a pirate named Jolene. She is out for Linebeck's blood, and she never seems to let up. Every time her icon pops up on the map, I panic and attempt to gun it. But she always seems to catch up with me eventually. Every time she climbs aboard the ship, you'll have a fight with her, and Linebeck will reward you for driving her away. He later reveals that he once sailed with her after accidentally crashing into an enemy ship that was attacking her and saving her life. Of course, he compromises this act of heroism by stealing her treasure and sneaking away, but the idea that he may have actually helped someone in need hints toward his true nature. He even shows some gratitude to Link in the form of a letter, even giving him a ship part as a gift. Your adventures are starting to have an effect on him. Eventually, Link conquers the Temple of the Ocean King and goes on to fight Bellum. The first phase has you removing the ooze from Bellum's body and then yanking him towards you, shooting at his tentacles from afar while strafing around him, and climbing the stairs surrounding the arena to get on his level, all while dodging the ooze and minor enemies he spawns. The fight is engaging, and the music is fantastic. Eventually, you team up with Ciela thanks to her true power as the spirit of time and courage, to freeze time at just the right moment and land hits on his weak spot. After this, Bellum snags Tetra just as she returns to normal. Bellum possesses the ghost ship and attempts to take her away, to which Linebeck responds with a surprising amount of determination. The effort you put into your ship's health really only pays off here, and it's not all that challenging to just shoot at the projectiles that fly at you. It's the final phase where things become truly incredible. After boarding the remains of a sunken ghost ship, Linebeck's ship is sunk with Oshus still aboard. On top of that, Link is taken hostage by Bellum, and he drops his sword. Linebeck finally steps up to the plate and stabs one of Bellum's tentacles, forcing him to drop Link. Linebeck manages to fend off Bellum long enough for Link to come to, but Bellum possesses Linebeck and locks you into a duel with him, fighting in a suit of armor. This duel is so much fun. You need to cut through his defenses with nothing but your sword, leaving Ciela open to give you a charge for your time-stopping power. His weak point is only visible for a brief window, so you need to quickly pick the right moment to stop time. He'll also perform a spin attack with a very wide radius and pattern, which can be difficult to avoid. Eventually, he'll go down, freeing Linebeck and restoring the world of the Ocean King to normal. As it turns out, Oshus is fine. He just turned into a whale, which makes sense when you consider that Bellum is a squid, the natural enemy of the sperm whale. In the end, Linebeck doesn't wish for treasure or riches. He wishes for his ship. Ciela, appreciating Linebeck's selfless deeds at the end of their journey, thanks Linebeck. After all that chastising, seeing Linebeck distraught with her leave was genuinely heartbreaking, as is the revelation that the world of the Ocean King was merely an illusion created by Oshus. Throughout the game, I always wondered where the world of the Ocean King is, relative to the Great Sea. I simply thought it was the waters beyond the Great Sea, sort of like how Termina exists just outside of Hyrule. A lot of the game seems to parallel Termina in that regard. Certain characters reminiscent of ones from Wind Waker don't recognize Link at all, although I've argued that Salvatore at least remembers him. I suppose one could say that the world of the Ocean King is just a flooded Termina, and that's why Link, Tetra, and Linebeck awakening from their adventures feels so surreal, as if it were a dream created by their memories. But because Link has the Phantom Hourglass and Linebeck's ship has returned, we know it wasn't. It is left open to interpretation, much like Majora's Mask, and thus concludes the adventures of the Hero of Winds. As for Linebeck, we don't know where he decides to go after the credits roll, but his memory is honored in Spirit Tracks, wherein his epitaph states that he came to the new land and started a family, confirming that he actually learned to care for people other than himself. Spirit Tracks takes place about 100 years after Phantom Hourglass. Nico is the only member of Tetra's crew that is still alive, and his creative talents have improved dramatically since his time there. Once again, this new incarnation of Link remains disinterested. There's something so tragic about Nico being the only surviving crew member, but he seems to take it in stride. So let's talk about this new Hyrule for a second. Basically, Tetra heeded the king's words at the end of the Wind Waker and founded a new Hyrule. I figured she wouldn't literally create a new Hyrule, instead creating a quaint land of her own. Kind of like how the people of the Great Sea have long since moved past Hyrule and its customs. But no, this new Hyrule uses the exact same customs that the previous kingdom did, except now they travel by train. This isn't something I entirely agree with, but the game at least honors the wishes of Wind Waker's characters, so it isn't a huge deal. The basic plot of this game is that Link is an engineer graduating from the academy. One of the officials at the ceremony, Cole, is actually a double agent for the Demon King Malladus, and he steals Zelda's body to use as a host for Malladus with the help of his assistant, Byrne, and fractures the Tower of Spirits. Throughout the game, you and Spirity Zelda over here work together with the Locomo Anjin to retrieve Zelda's body and stop Cole from resurrecting Malladus. Like I've discussed, Link and Zelda's dynamic make the game immediately more enticing, and it parallels the relationship between the Hero of Winds and Tetra. But the true star of the show here is Byrne. First of all, he has a really cool demeanor and character design, and he makes a strong first impression as he completely overpowers Alfonso. As it turns out, he once trained under Anjin, seeking nothing but power. Anjin dismissed him as unworthy, forcing him to look elsewhere. There's actually a fight with Byrne at the top of the Tower of Spirits, wherein you have Zelda yank him by his gauntlet and catch him as he charges forward, and then wail on him. It feels similar to the fight with Bellum at the end of Phantom Hourglass, but simpler in order to prepare you for what's to come. Byrne retreats from the battle as Cole resurrects Malladus in Zelda's body. He declares himself as the one that freed him from his prison, but Malladus nearly kills him. Byrne's pursuit of power is reminiscent of King Bulblin from Twilight Princess, and as the hero's shade once told us, a sword wields no strength unless the hand that holds it has courage. Link, Zelda, and Anjin still choose to bring Byrne to safety, wherein he sees the error of his ways and tells the trio what they need to pursue Malladus and bring him down. This brings us to the Dark Realm, where Spirit Track's finale takes place. Although I loved Phantom Hourglass's ending, I always felt that they could have tightened up the gameplay in a few areas. The first phase with Bellum was creative, but a bit too easy. The second phase was even easier, and felt as though the effort spent upgrading my ship wasn't entirely worth it. In response, Spirit Tracks created one of the strongest finales I have ever experienced in a Zelda game. The first phase has you playing Pac-Man. I'm serious, that's what it is. You have to navigate around this maze and hit warp points to take out the dark trains. Like always, they kill you in one hit. These were easily some of the most annoying things to deal with in the overworld, as they seem to only want to prevent you from taking the quick route to where you wanted to go, if you were unlucky. Thankfully, you can finally take your revenge in this phase of the finale. Once you collect a Tear of Light, you'll be invincible for a brief period, and if you pull the whistle, this happens. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I am more than happy to have waited this long. Obviously, it's not all fun and games. When your time runs out with a Tear of Light, you are immediately at risk of getting hit, so you need to find the shortest route to the next tier. Once you've derailed all but one dark train, the last one will make a beeline for you, so you need to make damn sure you're next to another tier. After all is said and done, you move on to the second phase, Demon Train Malladus. This is where your train part collecting really pays off. The more health you have here, the better, as you have to switch rails on a dime, slow down to avoid the train ahead of you merging across, and shoot the lasers out quickly before they can zap you. If you've been grinding out force gems and treasures across the various realms, your effort will be rewarded through gameplay here. This phase is a high-speed chase that demands quick thinking and the ability to foresee Malladus' attacks, and I love it. The next phase has you fighting through Cole's various attacks in order to reach Zelda's body, and it's tricky. You need to create a path for Zelda, and as she's walking, fend off Cole's attacks. If Cole possesses Zelda's suit, you need to find an angle to knock Cole away with the boomerang, which will set you back a bit. The terrain gets narrower as you approach the front of the train, meaning less room for error as your goal inches closer. Then, you shoot Malladus with the Bow of Light and free Zelda's body. Unfortunately, Zelda can't reclaim it at first, and Malladus attacks, but not before Byrne can repel him. This gives her the strength to finally reunite with her body, but unfortunately, Byrne is killed by Malladus shortly thereafter. Malladus is resurrected in his demonic form, reminiscent of a certain other demon king from the past. All you have to do here is deflect his projectiles as Zelda charges her power, but at this point the adrenaline is pumping. The desire to avenge Byrne is flowing through me. And then, just as you succeed, you have to play the Spirit Flute again. It's really awkward, and I have no idea why this game insists on stepping on its own feet, but it is cool to finally play the game's leitmotif to bring an end to the story. From there, you just need to line up Malladus' head with Zelda's line of sight, and bring him down once and for all. Together. With the Demon King defeated and as Anjean disappears, Link and Zelda join hands. You control them together throughout the entire game, and you end things together as a team. What a great ending. Spirit Tracks has a very beefy finale, but it's one I don't think I'll ever forget. It manages to give purpose to exploration of all of the game's systems, even ones I harshly criticized. And Linebeck and Byrne's character arcs may not be as fleshed out as Midna's or Groos's, but they bring heart to otherwise simple games. You know what? That's the best way to summarize Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. They're simple. They don't strive to be like their 3D counterparts or even the 2D games that came before them. The overworlds are simpler and more linear. Their structure is formulaic as you go between dungeons and their central tower. They don't overwhelm the player with too many things to memorize, instead implementing a note-taking system that drives a lot of their design. The control scheme is simple but graceful. The dungeons are simple but well constructed. The games are just simple. And in that regard, the team accomplished their goal to create accessible Zelda games. And yet, I've gone on about these games for over an hour. Despite their simplicity, they have a lot of uniqueness to offer, and I ended up having far more to say about them than I thought I would. They were simple games from a simpler time, and when I revisit them, it's like stepping into a time machine when the DS dominated portable gaming. With that said, I also believe these games are complex in that they are two halves of a whole, but not in the same way that Oracle of Seasons and Ages are. In this case, they both have strengths and weaknesses over one another. Phantom Hourglass's items are succinct and creative reworks of old Zelda items, whereas Spirit Tracks tried to experiment with new ones to mixed results, aside from the Sand Wand. Meanwhile, Spirit Tracks has an edge over Phantom Hourglass in dungeon design, thanks to significant improvement over the latter's lackluster dungeon theming. The Overworld is evocative of the best parts of Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, whereas in Spirit Tracks it is peculiarly segmented. The Temple of the Ocean King has a great concept that encourages its core focus and enables fast times, but the repetition is bound to sink in. Spirit Tracks loses out on that speedrunning approach, but refines pretty much everything that made the Temple of the Ocean King fun, and introduces an awesome new central mechanic through Princess Zelda. These games are so oddly codependent on each other. I can't help but feel like a third DS game would have perfected their concepts, but that era is long gone. Still, they bring me comfort in all of their ups and downs. Are these games truly great successors to Wind Waker? Not entirely, but I don't think that's what they were intended to be. Phantom Hourglass may borrow part of its identity from Wind Waker, but it is very much its own beast. Meanwhile, Spirit Tracks is less a sequel to Wind Waker, and more a sequel to Phantom Hourglass, and despite everything I disliked, that was for the best. These games took the message of the Wind Waker to heart. Rather than following in their predecessors' footsteps, they created something new. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks may be flawed, and I may still be yearning for a true sequel to my favorite game of all time, but they were wonderfully distinct yet endearingly simple adventures that I won't soon forget. Oh, by the way, you might be wondering what my idea of an ideal Wind Waker successor would be. Well, I was gonna tell you, but I won't, as it's something I'd like to make someday. Maybe you'll find out in the future. For now, I've been Liam Triforce, and I'd like to thank you for watching.